today's session on Himalayan Geopolitics. We are privileged to have our distinguished speakers with us. May I invite Dr. Claude Arpi, French-born author and journalist, Ambassador Dilip Sinha, former Indian diplomat and author, Sarste Kensho Rinpoche Jangchup Choeden, Deputy General Secretary of the International Buddhist Confederation. The moderator for the session is Bipindra NC, a seasoned journalist with 30 years of expertise in strategic affairs, geopolitics, aerospace, defense, and diplomacy. May I invite and request our speakers and moderator to please come on stage.
Namaskara. Good morning, namaste, bonjour, and vanakkam. Vanakkam, Tashi Delak. It's a pleasure to be here in Mangaluru Lit Fest. I want to thank Bharat Foundation, the organizers, and also all the sponsors of this event. It's a great effort. 7th edition is a big deal. I want to congratulate all of you participants here for attending this event. Today we have been given a very important topic, Himalayan geopolitics. It's a very confounding word actually. It's kind of puts you off in the sense that you don't know what is it all about, because it's so vast that you can't really put your finger on what is Himalayan geopolitics. There are various subjects, various issues related to Himalayan geopolitics that we can deal with minutely, specifically, including India-China relationship, India-Tibet relationship, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, you name all of them. All these dynamics come into play. There are environmental issues. There are issues relating to military affairs. There are, it's quite vast. But the thing is, we have a limited 1 hour time. We are going to be trying to deal with some specific issues so that we touch upon very important topics of the day. Contemporary issues, some historical issues. We'll try and deal with all of them. Today I have a great panel. In fact, it's a great honor for me to be here on the stage sharing with great eminent people. What I will do is, we have 1 hour time, so what I'll do is, I will introduce each of them alphabetically, if it's okay. And then I'll ask them a question, and then I'll go to the next speaker, introduce them and answer a question, and then we'll kind of follow up with other questions, and I'll come to the audience later for your questions too. First and foremost, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Claude Arpi. He was born in France in a very important year, 1949, when the Communist Party of China captured Beijing and declared the People's Republic of China. Mao Zedong declared it. So he was born in 1949. That itself is quite significant that way. And he's a trained dental surgeon. But instead of removing tooth of his patients, he decided to kind of test the tooth of the Chinese with his expertise in Chinese affairs, on Tibetan affairs specifically. He first traveled to the Indian Himalayas in 1972, and then in 1974 decided to come and stay in India permanently. It's been almost 50 years now that he's been in India, settled in Pondicherry at Auroville. He lives there. He has written widely on geopolitics. He's a very seasoned, experienced journalist. He has written plenty of books specifically focusing on India-China relations and on Tibet. He also holds the Chair of Excellence of Field Marshal K.M. Cariappa Chair of Excellence at the United Service Institution of India, which is a Delhi-based tri-service institution, tri-military service institution. And he has written several books under that project. There is a 4-part book that he has written. I recommend that you please go and take a look at all those books. They are masterpieces on India-China Tibet affairs. I welcome you, sir. But my first question is, a dental surgeon who came to settle down in India, what brought you to India in 1972 in the first place? And also in 1974, you decided to come and settle down in India permanently and took up Tibet as your favorite subject of research and book writing. What triggered all this?
I think I, first I came to India in 72. I was sort of fascinated by Himalaya and Tibet. So I had the good chance or the good karma, you would say, to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala in 72. Dharamsala was a small town. There was hardly any visitors. I was telling my friends, I was there last week, there's only 2-3 hotels. Now there must be thousands of hotels in all Kangra. So I had the opportunity to meet His Holiness sister, Mrs. Jetson Pamela, and she wanted me to be a dentist in Dharamsala, in the Tibetan children village. But in the meantime, I got to know about Sri Aurobindo and the work of the mother and about the utopian city of Auroville. So my heart was divided, and finally in 74, that is 50 years now, I came to settle in India. Now I came, if you allow me, something very special. I think we came by road, 35 of us. There was mostly French, but 2 from Germany, 1 from Canada, and we drove with a big bus and 3 vans all over Europe. Means France, Italy, Yugoslavia, it doesn't exist, Bulgaria, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. So I think it was I'm very privileged to have been able to go through that adventure and to see the world, to see different culture. But my first love was for the Himalaya. And as the moderator mentioned, Himalaya, I think, is a very, very important subject for the future of the Indian nation, for the future of Asia and the world. So there's battles, different battles for environment, but also a real battle. And that was in Ladakh. It started it's restarted in May of 2020. Now there's some sort of agreement for disengagement. I don't know how far will that disengagement. But you have these 2 aspects of the Himalaya. One, it's the most peaceful place in the world. All the lamas, the yogis, the pandits, the gods, Shiva, and so many others. I was there in Uttarakhand. They told me there's 33 crores of gods living in the Himalaya. So, nobody has counted that, but it's the most peaceful. It has been for centuries and millennia the most peaceful. And today is the most militarized area. And in Ladakh, there's 60, 70,000 Javan and officers facing the same number in China. The infrastructure has developed tremendously. So you have always that dichotomy. And I just conclude the small story that I have been visiting all these remote places, and about 20 years ago I was in Munsiari, and I met one very interesting lady. She's one of the great mountain experts in India, and she did the Trans-Himalaya, for all-woman Trans-Himalayan. And they were walking, all the women from the east to the west, and one night she stopped in the village, and she was sitting with the lady, the Pari lady there of the villager, and she said, "Kitna sundara, how beautiful it is." And the lady said, "Kitne dukh, there is so much suffering for the local people." So you have to find the balance between that beauty. And I think they need our Rinpoches and monks and to advise them, because today we are going full development, which is good, and I'm always advocating development, but we should not also forget the beauty, otherwise we'll destroy the beauty and we'll destroy the environment. So I think the need of the hour is to find a balance to preserve this Himalaya, and so that the gods, they don't go away, because one day they will be so disgusted by what is happening in the Himalaya, they will just run away. It's my views.
Thank you very much. I asked him this question to establish his credential as an expert on the subject, because he has been working on it for 50 years, written plenty of books, and also to we were discussing, you don't need a PhD to do this kind of in-depth research. That's the if you have passion for it, I think you can definitely do this kind of work that Dr. Arpi has done till date. And I hope that you continue to do so in the future
You're
also.
wasting time but sometimes you need a PhD also if you want to find a job in the university. Yes. But at my age, I think that it would be a waste of time.
Right. So our next guest today is Ambassador Dilip Sinha. He has served as the additional secretary and special secretary for international organizations and environment diplomacy in the Ministry of External Affairs. He was also the ambassador to Greece, deputy high commissioner to Bangladesh, deputy chief of mission in Brazil. He was India's permanent representative in the United Nations at Geneva. He also dealt with Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran as a joint secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Last year, he released a great book. I have read this book. It's called as the Imperial Games in Tibet. I recommend this strongly if you want to understand the historical perspective of the games that happened in the Himalayan geopolitics. Sir, to you, sir, what triggered you to write this? Because your entire background has been with regard to international organizations in economic diplomacy and environment diplomacy. What turned you to this Tibet?
Well, when you are interested in international affairs and you deal with international affairs, then and you are an Indian diplomat, then automatically India-China relations becomes an important part of your thinking because China is a very important country, and plus our adversarial relationship with China is very important. So I did want to understand what happened between India and China, what is the cause of the dispute, and I would occasionally read some books on India-China relations. But I realized that when in the discourse between India and the India-China relations, the key country, which is Tibet, was completely ignored not only by foreign writers but also by our own people. And any book that you read on the border dispute between India and China would look at China's claim, would look at India's claim, find flaws in India's claim, and say, look, India's claim is weak, therefore China's claim is strong. But I realized that China's claim to the border comes entirely from its claim to Tibet. And when we considered that Tibet is a part of China, then we automatically gave all the arguments over into China's hands. So we had to question that point. Is Tibet a part of China? And should we have conceded that? And that was the starting point of my thinking. So after retirement, I was able to start reading on it and reading about the various imperial powers in this region. And I realized that in this discourse, China's claim to Tibet is entirely fictitious. Yes, there was a military victory, and they colonized Tibet under the Qing dynasty, which is the Manchu dynasty in the 18th century. But in the 18th century, Britain also colonized India. That doesn't make India a part of Britain. So there was an imperial relationship an imperial colonial relationship between Tibet and China. But the question was, why is it that nobody on earth questions China's claim to Tibet? And that took me to the theme of this book, which was the imperial games, that there were two other imperial powers who were playing this game, Britain and Russia. And China was the third imperial power, and it was the interrelationship of these three imperial powers that determined the fate of Tibet. In fact, early in the 20th century, actually. And thereafter, when the People's Republic of China, of course, the Qing dynasty collapsed, Tibet became independent, declared independence also. The Chinese troops in Lhasa were sent back to China through India, incidentally. But then came the People's Republic that you mentioned about in 1949, and then they invaded Tibet in 1950. And the question came up, why did nobody came to the rescue of Tibet in 1950? And that is where the imperial agreements of the early 20th century came into play, which is why it's important to know about that period. And India, of course, followed the British policy, which was to recognize Tibet as a part of China. There was a bit of misunderstanding in India about what India's policy is. But this was the broad situation where I got interested, and I decided that I must write this book.
Absolutely, sir. Great contribution to this entire debate about geopolitics. As you rightly said, I think Tibet is the epicenter of the entire Himalayan geopolitics at this point in time, including the conflict, military conflict that we face between India and China. So thank you very much for this contribution, sir. We'll move on to the next expert on the panel today, Rinpoche Jangchup Choeden. He's a former abbot of the Ganden Shartse Norling University, based in southern India. He was awarded the Gishe Larampa doctoral degree in 1997, and in 2017 he was appointed the executive director of the International Geluk Foundation by His Holiness the Dalai Lama for the spread of the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism. He is fluent in 5 languages, including English, Mandarin, and Hindi. He is currently the Secretary General of the International Buddhist Confederation. I specifically mentioned about his Nalanda tradition because I would like to understand from, I would be very imprudent to ask him why did he get involved with Himalayan geopolitics, but essentially, so I want to ask him about this Nalanda tradition of Buddhism. Because the Chinese narrative has been that the Tibetan Buddhism needs to have Chinese characteristics. And also they claim that they have a kind of a superior Buddhist thought process and tradition. But also there are historical records which I am yet to kind of verify particularly, that some of the first Indian Buddhist monks who went to China and took Buddhism to China came from South India, particularly my home state, Tamil Nadu. And apparently this happened around the 7th century, early 7th century, at the time, same time when a lot of the Chinese Buddhist monks visited India, visited Nalanda and several places. So there is a kind of still a dispute over how Buddhism went to China and in particular to Tibet. What is your take on this particular issue? If you could also explain what is the Nalanda tradition?
Anirodham anutpadam anuchedam ashashvatam anekartham nanartham nagamam nirgamam yaha pratitya samutpadam parpancho pashmam shivam deshyamasa sambudastam vande vadatam varam. By paying homage to great teacher the Shakyamuni, it's a great pleasure to be part of this wonderful literature festival in Mangalore. Thank you very much for your introduction, Bipindra ji. The topic, Himalayan geopolitics, is a very interesting topic. But you know, I'm not a geopolitics expert, but geopolitics is something that is connected to a lot of things. And in my capacity, I can say that I'm a cultural man, I'm a religious man, and spiritual man. And geopolitics didn't remain cut off from culture, religion, and spirituality. That is the reality at the ground. So I think that makes my presence on this stage a little bit relevant, unless maybe it appears like it's irrelevant. So now here talking about the Himalayan geopolitics, as Bipindra ji has put forward, Buddhism plays a great role in Himalayan geopolitics. This entire region of Himalaya is very deeply kind of affected by Buddhist philosophical viewpoint, and the Buddhist lifestyle and Buddhist culture. So the Buddhism, I do remember one of the kind of famous Tibetan Buddhist master used to say that if we look into the history, Buddhism has been the biggest export of this country and biggest contribution of this country towards the entire humanity. Buddhism is started to be exported the moment Buddha started teaching it. And since then, it is exported all the way up to today. And even today, we are exporting Buddhism from this country. So, history of this country, culture of this country, and a lot of other things cannot be explained without kind of touching the Buddhism. So its geopolitics also is that part. So when we come to kind of spread of Buddhism in China, actually it appears like spread of Buddhism in China has started somewhere around 3rd century, much earlier than any other countries. So in the initial stage, it may have kind of moved through the kind of a Silk Route, the northern route of trade. And then in the course of time, it has moved through the kind of ocean routes, the southern routes of trade. So that happened throughout the history. And since it has started in the 3rd century, it is roughly around 1,700 years of history. So within that period, there are huge changes that have came. Nowadays, we have Chinese Buddhism, we have Tibetan Buddhism, we have Vajrayana, we have Mahayana, we have Hinayana, we have Theravada, all these different tribes of Buddhism. But they all claim that they are Buddhist. They all follow the Buddha. So that makes a huge difference. There is no question that where Buddha taught the Buddhism, where Buddha started teaching, in India. And India is the place of origin of Buddhism. No one should be doubting about that. No one should be raising question about that. But in a modern geopolitics, everyone is trying to highlight their own kind of asset from the kind of political view. Everyone talks about the assets. China have their assets, India have our own assets, and every country have their own assets. Everyone is trying to use that asset to kind of establish some benefits. So at presently, it appears like China has the kind of maximum number of Buddhist followers, and they are looking forward to take that advantage and push forward their narratives. And they have the right to do that. And India has majority of the Buddhist holy places. And history, India has the history at its side. Buddhism was born in India, and it was flourished in India, and then it was exported from India. That is the truth. So based on that, India is creating its own narrative. And there are kind of a clash of narrative that happens in the kind of international political platform. That's very common. So here, the Himalayan geopolitics, the Buddhist kind of influence is always in the favor of India. I think it can be used, it can be kind of presented in a proper way if proper planning and proper strategizing is done. So I would just like to say up to that point, at this point.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dr. Arpi, the Ambassador Sinha mentioned that the claims of Chinese on Tibet is absolutely unjustified, and there is no reason behind it. But there is a very famous Mao Zedong's quote that everybody quotes here and there, that He talked about Tibet and said that Tibet is like a palm, and there are 5 regions here in the Himalayas which are like the 5 fingers of a palm, which these regions include Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Nepal, Bhutan, and Ladakh. What is your view on this? Is there any kind of a justification for Mao Zedong to say such things, or did he really say such a thing? What is your experience on it, and what does your research say on it, and what are the chances that Xi Jinping, who kind of wants to make an imprint on Chinese history after Mao Zedong, there are 2 options before. One is Taiwan and the other is Arunachal Pradesh in terms of territorial claims. Do you think you would make an attempt on Arunachal Pradesh or any of these 5 fingers that Mao Zedong is being quoted on?
Let me answer for the 5 fingers and the palm is the Tibetan plateau. I think it's the most beautiful fake quote. It's really beautiful, it's useful, everyone has quoted it, every expert has quoted it. And I was asked about 15, 20 years ago, where did you get this? I had put also in one of my books, and I start searching, and I start contacting all the people expert in Mao Zedong's thought and Mao Zedong writing. It is nowhere. Mao Zedong has not said it officially. Nobody, maybe he has said it informally, but it remains a very, very beautiful quote, but it's fake. So I think there are many, many quotes like that which are fake but which are good. Now it's good because today China still claims the entire Arunachal Pradesh as southern Tibet. Not only that, but they have changed the name 3 times last 3 years of many places in Arunachal Pradesh, around Tawang, even south of and similarly, Ladakh, they have always said it's a disputed area. And so this is a fact that they would like to advance. And we realized what happened in May of 2020 in Ladakh. For no reason, Xi Jinping sent the PLA in 5 places, in Depsang, Jangchup, the finger areas, Hot Spring, and Galwan, and try to advance this thing. So I think it's like, I always say it, but it's not very nice to say, but it's like in the DNA, at least of the communist regime, to grab few. If you look back 4 years later, what has Xi Jinping gained? Not much. And actually, it was quite a defeat that he accepted in October, last October, to sign a disengagement agreement. In fact, nothing has been disengaged much. They allow Indian patrols to go back where they were going before May of 2020. And on the other side, I mentioned earlier that a lot of infrastructure development has taken place, helipad, roads, trains, even naval base, a huge bridge on the Pangong Tso, that big lake where India and China are facing each other. They have done a new bridge. And so there's no disengagement, and China is still pushing. So I think today, my experience going, I was very privileged to go with Venerable Rinpoche to Takshin. I don't know how many of you have heard about Takshin. It's one Upper Subansari district of Arunachal. It's right on the LAC, and this is one of the disputed places in Arunachal. What I've seen in all these places, India has done tremendous effort. Of course, India will be always 15, 20 years late on China. China are masters. If in 1954, when Ambassador Sinha was mentioning that they came in 51, they occupied Lhasa. Between 51 and 54, they did that 2 main axes between Sichuan and Tibet, and Qinghai in the north and Tibet. That is so remarkable what they have achieved. tens of thousands of Chinese died, and Tibetans also, that they walk on this road and tunnel. Today they are far in advance. That's why there is a possibility that they do some hydropower plants in north of Arunachal, because they are really the best. But India has catch up a little bit, not much, but I think sufficiently for the Indian army to defend the border. And they cannot do today what they have done in May of 2020 in Ladakh. They cannot do it in Arunachal or even in Uttarakhand. There's 4, 5, 6 places disputed, or even in northern Sikkim they try. So the situation has changed, but the mindset of the party, and but we can hope that Xi Jinping has learned from this, because he has gained nothing. I tell you, in 4 years, what has he gained? In my view, not much. And he has a party. In India, you have the public opinion. You have the MPs who are vociferous in parliament. You have the media, which is more or less neutral or fair. But in China, you have the central committee of the party, the 200 more powerful nominated member of the party. You have the Politburo, you have a standing committee. And so this put also pressure on Xi Jinping, and he could be questioned, and he is questioned. That's why in 1 year he had to sack 2 defense ministers.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Arpi. Ambassador Sinha, of course, Dr. Arpi has mentioned about this disengagement that has happened after 4.5 years of military conflict in Ladakh. The agreement has been done, and obviously we have started patrolling areas again. Despite this thaw in this relationship at the border areas, the military thaw that has happened, do you think the Chinese, particularly the Communist Party of China, can be trusted by India, anytime at all? Because I believe, just to give you a historical context, George Fernandez was the first Indian defense minister who openly said that the Chinese are the enemy number 1 of India. And obviously they have been proving it time and again with small skirmishes or incursions in the borders time and again. And in this context, we also have this 4 border agreements since 1991 that has kind of sort of failed during this 4.5 years of conflict. What should India do? Do you think we should trust them? In fact, Ronald Reagan in the 1980s said that when he was asked a question about China, whether they can be trusted, he said, trust but verify. So what is your take on this particular subject? Can we trust them at all? Should India do anything about it? What should India do here?
Well, when it comes to the question of trusting China, in 1951, the Dalai Lama, Tibet signed an agreement with China. And you know what happened thereafter. 1951, they signed the 17-point agreement, under which China agreed to respect the autonomy of Tibet, the institutions of Dalai Lama, and Tibetan culture. We know what happened after that. And in 1959, His Holiness had to come and take refuge in India. So that is the question as far as Tibet trusting China is concerned. We also trusted China. We signed an agreement in 1954, the Panchsheel Agreement. We know what happened in 1959 and then what happened in 1962. So this Ronald Reagan idea of trust but verify, that applies perhaps to other people but doesn't apply to China. Now we're talking about the Himalayan geopolitics today. China claims, the Himalayan region was always a frontier between Tibet and India, and it was always an extremely peaceful frontier. Various religious ideas survived in this area. This was the place of the gods. The Kailash Mansarovar, the Kailash mountain, the Parvat, is holy to 3 religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and the Bon religion. And all of them exist peacefully. One has never heard of a fight among the various devotees trying to go around the Kailash Parvat and praying over there. So in the Himalayan region, there are many areas where Buddhists were in large numbers, many areas where other people were in large numbers. China today claims all the Buddhist areas of the Himalayan belt as its territory based upon the claim that they belong to Tibet. Now, but India and Tibet never had a dispute on this region. The dispute arose only when China came into the picture. And China's claims are all entirely imperial claims. There was a person who did a study from some think tank in China, says that China's imperial conquests, the list is first is Taiwan, which they plan to conquer in the next whenever. Then there is the Senkaku Island with Japan. Then you have the islands in South China Sea. Then you have the Himalayan belt, which is the five fingers, which are all the five areas over which China claims sovereignty. After that would come Manchuria and Mongolia. This is the list that was drawn by one of the think tanks in China. So we have to be clear that China has never ever given up the claim to these areas. Now you talked about the agreements that we have had with China since 1993, when we started having talks with China. These agreements are only about codes of behavior for the troops on the border. They are not, there is no line drawn anywhere. The line of actual control is not a line. It is just a region where both countries used to go and patrol. And the Indian side would go and patrol, the Chinese side would go and patrol. If they would meet on some occasion, they would sit and have a cup of tea and come back. Neither side would dispute the other's claim, although both sides would claim it. In Galwan, what happened was that this sacred understanding was broken, and our troops were taken by surprise when they were attacked by. The troops are not supposed to carry weapons. In Galwan, the Chinese came with clubs with barbed wire around them to beat up our people. And since our people were taken by surprise there, they suffered casualties. I presume our people are now much more alert. And what we are doing now is, in this agreement, we are essentially just disengagement. But China has never used the word disengagement or even de-escalation in its releases.
Yeah.
There is only an arrangement. So there we are on what we have agreed upon and what we had earlier. China has not given up its claims, and we have to be alert all the time.
Yeah, this, of course, the four agreements, border agreements, are essentially an arrangement that has happened, how the troops will conduct themselves in the border.
Code of behavior.
Exactly. So, as far as the special representative talks are concerned, on the border question, the larger border question itself, you may correct me if I'm wrong. Is it true that the Chinese are not willing to put the LAC maps on the table, whereas the Indian side is ready to do it? And why is that so?
Well, I'm not an expert on this. You have an expert here, Dr. Claude Arpi.
Yeah, the question is the larger boundary issue in which the special representatives, the NSA on our side, and the external affairs minister, the foreign minister on the Chinese side, Wang Yi, they hold talks on the border question. So there it is believed that the Indian side is more than willing to put the maps of the border on the table, LAC maps on the table, whereas the Chinese side are unwilling to do it. So is that true? And if that is so, what is the implication of it?
Historically, in 2000, there was an exchange of map for the central sector, which is Uttarakhand, Himachal, and the Chinese gave us their map and India. And there was only one discrepancy, one place called Barawati. In 2002, there was supposed to be a similar exchange for the northern sector, means Ladakh. The maps were brought for 20 minutes on the table, and they realized that there was too much discrepancy. There was 12 places, and they withdrew. For the eastern sector, there never any exchange. So when Ambassador Sinha speak about this agreement of 93 or 96, 2005, 2010, it all mentioned the LAC, one LAC, and there is no map of the LAC. China is pretending, and they have planted in the Indian, some Indian analysts, they have planted the fact that there was a map in 59, in September 59. This is not correct. There was no map of LAC exchange, only Zhou Enlai in December 62, after the war, 1 month after the war, he distributed to the Asian and African country one very vague map, which is still the same, but there's no precise map. What has happened during these 4 years in Ladakh, for the first time, I think there was because its army was delaying. Some representative, the joint secretary of the MEA was there also. But for the first time, they mapped the area and both sides exchange. So at least it's done partly for Ladakh. But you have to remember that when the Ambassador Sinha speak of Galvan, or you speak of Hot Spring, Gogra, or Depsang, is very, very far from what Mr. Choeden, the Chinese premier, had shown to Prime Minister Nehru in 1956. So there was the ministry had published in 63 publication called Chinese Aggression in Maps. And you see that line moving. And today we are at Galvan, we are at Gogra, we are at Depsang, but it's very, very far from area which has never been part of the Chinese Empire. Never. And similarly, in the other sector of the border, the boundary, there's not a single Chinese who has ever come in what today is Arunachal Pradesh, which was Nifa earlier. The Chinese never came to Tawang. And suddenly, because of Tibetan had some influence. And actually, this pocket of influence in Arunachal is only 10%. It's the Takshin, the place where we went. It's Walong, small place, Menchuka, small place, and the main one is Tawang. It's 10% of the landmass of the Arunachal. But they claim the entire thing without, as Ambassador said, without any historical background.
Yeah. So actually, this brings me to a very important question because Ambassador Sinha, you say that there is no, judicious claim on Tibet, and of course, an extension of that is to the five fingers that they talk about, the Chinese talk about. So, and also in the recent years or for several years now, China has been pushing this one China principle, where they want every nation in the world to recognize that all the occupied territories, including the East Turkestan, which today Chinese call as Xinjiang, and the Inno-Mongolian region, the Manchurian region, all these regions to be identified as Chinese territory. This question is to Dr. Arpi too. So, if we admit to that particular, when there is a difference between a principle and a policy. When you say principle, there is no compromise on it. You can't negotiate a principle. But if it is a policy, you can tweak it. You can always do whatever you want with it. You can tweak it. You can amend it. You can even scrap it. So that is the difference between a principle and a policy. So I would like to call it as one China policy because of this very reason. So is this one China policy to which India has also admitted beneficial to India? Are there threats if we challenge this one China policy? Is it going to be beneficial to the Tibetans and Tibet if we discard this one China policy? What is your view on this? Dr. Arpi, I would like to invite your view also on this. First, Dr. Sinha.
You see, this
Ambassador Sinha.
One China policy, we must remember, pertains only to the dispute between the People's Republic of China, which is based in Beijing, and the Republic of China, which is based in Taiwan. That battle took place in 1949, and the nationalist China moved over to Taiwan. So the question is, who represents China? And this was the dispute in the United Nations, which continued from 1949 to 1971. So that is a separate issue. I don't want to go into that issue. For us, what is relevant is Tibet a part of China, and do we recognize it as a part of China? And that is the question. Officially, we recognize Tibet as a part of China. There's no denying that. No country in the world says that Tibet is a colony under Chinese occupation. But that is the point that I have questioned in my book, and I insist that we have to start questioning that. Because Tibet was never a part of China in its history. And here I'd like to cite the example that all the Chinese scholars who came to study Buddhism in India, there were three very famous ones: Fa Xian in the 4th century, in the Gupta period, then Xuanzang, who came in the 7th century, and then Yi Qing, who came also in the 17th century. None of them came through Tibet. Xuanzang came through Central Asia, Fa Xian came through Central Asia, Xuanzang went back through Central Asia, Yi Qing came by the sea route, Fascian went back by the sea route. They didn't come through Tibet, and it is not as if Tibet did not have links with India at that time. Tibetan scholars were coming to Nalanda to study. Now, Xuanzang came to Nalanda, studied there, I think, for 10 years. Now, I'm not an expert again on this issue, but I don't think Xuanzang has referred to the Tibetans who were studying in Nalanda. Perhaps
yeah.
Mr. Arpi might be able to tell us on that. If you go to a foreign country and you meet your countrymen, the first thing you do is you meet the countrymen, even if it's from a different part of the country. But abroad, you are all from the same country. But here, Xuanzang comes and spends 10 years in Nalanda, and I don't think he refers to anything about the Tibetans who were studying there. So, in the national consciousness of China, Tibet was never a part of the country. And in Chinese history itself today, the official history which they write, different historians have different periods of time when they claim that Tibet became a part of China. Some say it became a part of China when the Manchus conquered Tibet in 1720. Some say no, when the Mongols conquered in 1240. Some say no, earlier in the Tang dynasty. And now the official line is that since ancient times, Tibet has been a part of China. So their own record, their own narrative keeps changing.
Right, sir. Dr. Arpi, you have anything to add to this?
I have been working last few months on maps of the border in Tibet, Himalaya, and China. I found many maps of China. They stopped their territory stopped at the Great Wall of China. And west of that is not China. So, and again, the tragedy is that this Kailash Mansarovar, or that place where we went with Rinpoche, that Taksin, there was pilgrimage, very, very famous, and people would cross the border. They know Aadhaar card or identification or no, anybody from India could go, and similarly people from Tibet could visit. And for example, in Ladakh, there was 400 monks in Lhasa studying in the monasteries. In Tawang, many of these monks were studying in Losoling Monastery in Lhasa. So that was a free trade. In Chumbi Valley, which is east of Sikkim, there was 150 Marwari shop selling everything. You could buy a car, you can get a motorbike. They would dismantle the car, take it over Natula or Jalepla, and re-put it together on the other side. Everyone would buy, the rich people would buy Omega watch or this thing. They were traders, and when Nehru visited in September 58, that Chumbi Valley, he met all these traders. He had I've collected quite a lot of pictures of his talks with. So that was a free trade, free pilgrimage, and all this stopped in '62. That is a tragedy, because the Himalayan people who are very close to the Tibetan, they have no. So I want Rinpoche to say something about that, because.
Yeah, Rinpoche, I would like to add to what Dr. Arpi said and ask you questions before we move on to the audience question. There are two critical issues, with regard to the Tibetan movement in exile is concerned. One is it's over 10 years since His Holiness the Dalai Lama gave up his temporal and administrative duties, and there is a democracy now. You have a Sikyong who gets elected. There have been 3 elections that have happened till date. So how strong is the Tibetan democracy at this point in time? And how, of course, His Holiness himself is about 89 years old now, but he has said somewhere that he will live up to 110 years. So his succession is a major question, and China wants to kind of interfere in that process of selection of the next Dalai Lama. So if you could just touch upon these two issues also, along with your...
You see, these are very kind of important questions, and these questions really need a lot of time to address these things. First thing is, everyone tried to explain the situation from today's worldview. If we look into the history, we have all these little kingdoms. There was no such a big country. And according to Mr. Yuval Noah Harari, these big countries became possible because of the information kind of revolution. So this, legitimizing, trying to legitimize your control over certain area because of, some connection, this doesn't work. This doesn't kind of move forward. Just yesterday, I think most of you have heard about that. Israel is claiming to kind of revive the old Israel. It's kind of it's unthinkable in today's modern kind of the system. But anyone can claim anything. We are free to say anything. But it is going to happen in the ground. That's another different thing. So there are a lot of such things. I told you, like, every country try to build up their own narratives. And there are also counter-narratives. And everyone's have their own story, version of story. But which one is going to sustain and which one is going to flourish, no one knows. So this is the ground reality at present. And then when we come to this issue of, Tibetan diaspora. Now, Tibetan diaspora, telling you the truth, I grew up in Tibetan diaspora, but I'm an Indian. I'm grateful to this state particularly. I lived in Karnataka for 40 plus years. But this is an irony. I don't know Kannada. I'm sorry for that. But I can understand you to some extent, but when it comes to communicate, I cannot gain the fluency. So this is another issue that we are facing. Now, in this country, in Karnataka, if we talk about the Tibetan diaspora, roughly around 30 to 40% of Tibetan diaspora within India live in this state. But many of the Kannada friends don't know about that. Tibetans think this state has been greatly generous to them. And I feel Tibetan refugee community has been greatly generous to me. Though I'm an Indian, but I lived in Tibetan refugee community to get trained as a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and after that, rise in the hierarchy to be the Kulpati of the Tibetan Buddhist kind of monastic institute, and then kind of at presently I'm in this position because I have that background. If I didn't came from that side, I may probably not speaking in front of you. So this is the reality. Now, Tibetan diaspora is a very, very efficient and kind of influential diaspora. And of course, that goes back to the His Holiness Dalai Lama. He is a very visionary leader, and he thinks in a much kind of a wide and extensive scale. Of course, he has a lot of expert friends and kind of advisors and so on, but that is his great contribution. Now, why Tibetan kind of administrative changes happen? His Holiness always has this thinking. Tibetan administration or the Tibetan government in exile must learn to survive without the influence of Dalai Lama. That was his thinking. So he prepared that system to move towards the direction when the day happens that His Holiness is no more, but it will sustain. It can run. So that was his preparation. And it was kind of exemplary. Most of the time, in normal politics, everyone tried to kind of cling to the power. Even someone is about to die this night, they will cling to the power this morning. That is the politics in today's world. But things are different. All the politicians doesn't do that. His Holiness became politician not by choice. Nowadays, everyone go and choose to become politician and go there. But His Holiness didn't become the politician because of his choice. He was put into a situation where there is no other choice. He have to just remain in that position. So, now, the Tibetan administration has become fully kind of established under a democratic system. But it has its own problems. We have seen in past 15 years that how society get kind of, we say, divided or polarized because of some, selected people's loss and gain. This is really kind of an irony, but it is a ground reality in a democracy. Democracy has a lot of good things to offer to us, humanity. But there are a lot of problems also in democracy. But we need to learn how to solve these problems and how to live with these good things. This is a reality. So Tibetan community is learning and is kind of growing in that field. I do hope in the course of time they will become more mature and resolve the issues much more in a kind of a comprehensive and much more kind of experienced way. So that is what I can kind of pray for. But I don't know, is it going to happen or not?
Thank you, Rinpoche, for that answer. I think there are a lot of issues within Tibet, including human rights violations, and also lack of choice in terms of democratic choice for the Tibetans who are living there, and there is complete control of the Chinese, Communist China over Tibet today. With this, I think we are actually almost at the end of our time, so I need to quickly go to the audience. But before we do that, let me ask, let's do a straw poll. How many of you think that India needs to do more for Tibet and Tibetans, in the entire Himalayan geopolitical issue? Raise your right hand.
Yes, almost everybody.
I think almost everybody. Great. Thank you so much. I would have asked this question, what India needs to do from all the three panelists, but I would ask the audience, if any of you want to pose a question, please do. Please identify yourself. Only one question and quick question. We don't have much time.
My name is Damodar Padavidri. The question is with regard to the dam which is presently building in Tibet itself. China is planning to, in the process of building a dam there. So Manasarovar trips have been stopped at present. And the dam is so huge that the water will be, they are using the water of Brahmaputra fully. And whatever unneeded water, they are sending it to the state of, they are sending it to India and Bangladesh.
Absolutely. So
First
that's
point.
a wonderful question.
Second,
one question, please.
Second,
No, please, one question.
We need to wind it up in one.
We need to give opportunity to others, please. It's a very vital question that you have asked. There are ecological issues also. There has been an earthquake in Tibet.
That's the point. Second question.
Please, I know. Please. Could any of you answer this question, please? It's a very important. I think Dr. Arpi is the expert on this.
I'm going counter-current. I don't agree with the Indian media about the big dam. I think the Chinese is planted that story to excite the Indian media. It's not easy. It's not a simple. First, there will never be a big dam. It was a series of 8, 9 cascade dam when the Chinese engineers have worked for 30, 40 years, and the plans have completely evolved. It's not at all the same thing that in 1986 they wanted to do a micro-nuclear device to open the way of the Yalong Sampo, the Brahmaputra. There is a lot of issue, and we have seen 2 days back with the earthquakes in Tingri that the entire Himalayan belt is seismologically is very, very fragile. In the largest earthquake in 20th century was on Independence Day on 1950, 3 years after the independence. In India, we call it Assam earthquake, but it was epicentered in Tibet, in Lohit sector. So that same seismology is taking place in Yalong Sampo, Siang, Dibang, and all these areas, not only in Tingri where we saw. So this is a very, very complicated issue. There's a lot of politics and there's a lot of big lobbies also pushing for the dam because they want to make money. I don't think it will happen very soon. They have started doing a tunnel about 4 or 5 years ago in one place called Doshongla, which would correspond with the entry of the water the hydropower plant. That tunnel is blocked by landslides since 2 years. So it's not easy, it will not happen, but China, you have to remember that half of the news comes from China. They may be planted. You have to be very careful, and I think we should do much, much more scientific research before coming to a conclusion and be sure that they will do a dam or not.
Yeah, is there a lady who wants to ask a question?
There's no lady.
We are an equal opportunity platform. Any lady wants to ask a question quickly? No? Yeah. Okay. We are going to conclude it now. One last question I would like to ask, in one sentence or one issue that you think that India needs to do for Tibet. If you can answer in one line, it will be great. What should India need to do? Any one issue, please identify, put your finger on. If you can answer in one sentence, it will be great. Please go ahead.
Indians need to learn more about Tibet and its kind of strategic importance for this country. That is what I would like to request.
Thank you so much. So,
I entirely agree with Rinpoche. And I would say that we should also start raising the human rights violations and the cultural genocide that is taking place inside Tibet in the international fora.
absolutely great. So, what about you, sir?
I will put the ball in Rinpoche's camp. I think the Himalayan people who are very closely linked with Tibet should come more together, and they have started. They have now, that was the objective of our visit in the Subansari, to come together and to also show and to also invite His Holiness to reincarnate in the Himalayan belt and do more for Tibet. If it comes from them, it will have more weight than if it comes from Washington, D.C. That is my view.
Thank you so much. Two key takeaways from this session. One, there is no justified claim on Tibet for the communist China. And number two, India needs to do more for the Tibetans and Tibet cause. With that, I wrap up this session. I want to thank my panelists for the great wisdom and insight and for the time. Yeah.
And we should trust Tibet, but
not trust
with
China.
moderation, with a great moderation, and keep our eyes open.
Yeah. I want to thank the organizers for this opportunity. Let's put your hands together for the yeah.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed a very informative session. Now may I invite Durga Ramdas Katil to present the memento to our speakers and moderator.